approval, especially when he said he was Sicilian, that his father was born in Sicily. Sinatra's voice cracked a little as he spoke, and he looked more reflective than happy. At another concert, in the northern Italian city of Genoa, he had a joke for his audience. "Two very important and wonderful people came from Genoa," he quipped. Uno, Christopher Columbus, due, mia mamma." The second crowd cheered too, though a little less enthusiastically when he mentioned that his father was Sicilian. "I don't think," he said wryly, "that they're too thrilled about Sicilia." It was a nod to northern Italians' feelings about the island off the southernmost tip of the country. They look down on its people as backward and slothful, and because, as all the world knows, it is synonymous with organized crime. Frank Sinatra's paternal grandfather grew up in Sicily in the second half of the 19th century, a time of social and political mayhem. His childhood and early adult years coincided with the collapse of civil authority, brutally suppressed uprisings, and the rise of the Mafia to fill the power vacuum. Beyond that, very little has been known about the Sinatra family's background in Sicily. The grandfather's obituary, which appeared in the New York Times because of his famous grandson, merely had him born in Italy in 1884, though his American death certificate indicates he was born much earlier, in 1866. Twice, in 1964 and in 1987, Frank Sinatra told audiences that his family had come from Catania, about as far east as one can go in Sicily. Yet he told one of his musicians, principal violist Anne Barak, that they came from Agrigento, on the southwestern side of the island. His daughter Nancy, who consulted her father extensively while working on her 2 books about his life, wrote that her great-grandfather had been born and brought up in Agrigento. His name, according to her, was John. In fact, he came from neither Catania nor Agrigento, was born earlier than either of the dates previously reported, and his true name was Francesco, in the American rendering, Frank. Sicilian baptismal and marriage records, United States immigration and census data, and interviews with surviving grandchildren establish that Francesco Sinatra was born in 1857 in the town of Lercara Fridi, in the hills of northwest Sicily. It had about 10,000 inhabitants, and it was a place of some importance, referred to by some as Piccolo Palermo, Little Palermo. The town was located, in the words of a prominent Italian editor, in the core territory of the Mafia. The town lies 15 miles from Corleone, a name made famous by The Godfather, and in real life a community credited with breeding more future American mafiosi than any other place in Sicily. It is just 12 miles from the Mafia stronghold of Prizzi, as in Prizzi's Honor, the Richard Condon novel about the mob and the film based on it that starred Jack Nicholson. It was Lercara Fridi, however, that produced the most notorious mafioso of the 20th century. Francesco Sinatra's hometown spawned Lucky Luciano. One of his own lawyers described him as having been, quite simply, the founder of the modern Mafia. Luciano, whose real name was Salvatore Lucania, was born in Lercara Fridi in 1897. Old marriage and baptismal registers show that his parents and Francesco Sinatra and his bride, Rosa Salimbene, were married at the church of Santa Maria della Nieve within 2 years of each other. Luciano was baptized there, in the same font as Francesco's first 2 children. In all the years of speculation about Frank Sinatra's Mafia links, this coincidence of origin has remained unknown. Other new information makes it very likely that the Sinatras and the Lucanias knew each other. The 2 families lived on the same short street, the Via Margherita di Savoia, at roughly the same time. Luciano's address book, seized by law enforcement authorities on his death in 1962 and available today in the files of the Federal Bureau of Narcotics, contains only 2 entries for individuals who lived in Lercara Fridi. One, a member of his own family, and the other a man named Salimbene, a relative of the woman Francesco Sinatra married. Even if the Sinatras and the Lucanias did not know each other, Luciano's later notoriety makes it certain that the Sinatra family eventually learned that they and the gangster shared the same town of origin. Kinship and origins are important in Italian-American culture, and were even more so in the first decades of the diaspora. That the Sinatra family came from the same town as a top mafioso was not in itself a cause for embarrassment. The reason for the obfuscation, though, may be found in the family involvement with bootlegging in Frank Sinatra's childhood, and, above all, in his own long-time relationship with Luciano himself, the extent of which can now be documented for the first time. By 1889, Francesco and Rosa had moved to a working-class suburb of Palermo. 2 more sons were born there, but died in infancy, possibly victims of the cholera epidemic that ravaged the neighborhood in the early 1890s. 1.5 million Sicilians were to leave the island in the next 25 years, many going to Argentina and Brazil, and, increasingly, to the United States. Francesco Sinatra joined the exodus in the summer of 1900. At the age of 43, he said goodbye to Rosa and their surviving children — there were by now 3 sons and 2 daughters — and boarded a ship for Naples. There he transferred to the British steamer Spartan Prince, carrying a steerage ticket to New York. At Ellis Island on July 6th, he told immigration officials he planned to stay with a relative living on Old Broadway in Manhattan. He had $30 in his pocket. Francesco found work and soon had enough confidence to start sending for his family. His eldest son, Isidore, joined him in America, and Salvatore, just 15 and declaring himself a shoemaker like his father, arrived in 1902. Rosa arrived at Christmas the following year, accompanied by Antonino, age 9, and their 2 daughters, Angelina and Dorothea, who were younger. Antonino, Anthony Martin, or Marty as he would become in America, was to father the greatest popular singer of the century. In Francesco's day, Italian immigrants were greeted with widespread hostility. They were at the bottom of the heap in New York, ostracized by those who had arrived before them, by the Germans and the Irish especially. Italians were said to be dirty, ignorant, and criminal, and were vilified as wops, dagoes, guineas. Early in the 20th century, when blacks were being lynched in the South, some Americans considered Italians, immigrants from southern Italy and Sicily especially, not even white. The Ku Klux Klan railed against them. They found themselves excluded from churches used by other ethnic groups, consigned to menial work, and persecuted by the police. Many Italians were cobblers, apparently too many, for Francesco found work as a boilermaker. He later landed a job at the American Pencil Company that paid $11 a week, about $200 today, and stayed with the company for 17 years. Rosa, like Francesco, already well into her 40s, raised their children and eventually opened a small grocery. By that time, the couple had long since left New York City for the town now inseparably linked with the name Sinatra, Hoboken. In the 19th century, the town had been a resort for opulent New Yorkers like the Vanderbilts and the Astors. By the time the Sinatras arrived, however, it had become a grubby industrial town of 60,000 people. Its waterfront on the Hudson River served ocean-going ships and backed onto a jumble of factories and railroad yards. The Irish ran the city, held the plum jobs, occupied the best housing. Italian newcomers, crammed into a few mean streets to the west, made the best of it in tenements. Hoboken was a tough town, and Italians straying into Irish territory after dark invited violent attack. Many men in the Italian section owned firearms, mostly antiquated handguns, and in 1909 some of them fought a battle against the Irish-dominated police.